Hi guys, it's Debbie, and today, finally, after 3 years of waiting since his last film, at last I can speak about my favourite director's latest film. Yes, my dear friends, today we finally get to talk about Tenet by Christopher Nolan. Now, I know what you might be thinking, and that is that I will always blindly defend Christopher Nolan because I love his work so much. And I do love it, but I went to watch this film with the most unbiased eye I could come up with, and I hope I'll be able to convey my opinion on the subject in the most objective manner. The one big issue I was pondering on instead was whether to include spoilers in this video, because films of this kind are quite tricky to speak about while avoiding colossal plot elements, but on the other hand, many haven't seen Tenet yet. So I eventually decided that throughout most of this video, I will not include any spoilers, until a small portion right at the end, which I will clearly announce, in which I will speak freely about certain aspects of the film. So depending on how much you want to know, you can click away later on in this video. The attempt to prevent spoilers about this film at the moment is so widespread that it was the first movie I saw at the cinema which included a huge warning at the beginning concerning photos or footage, and there was a continuous rotation of staff making sure that we weren't filming anything. So we were trying to keep the secret, and I would love to hear your opinion on the film. Make sure to leave all your thoughts in the comment section down below, but please make sure to not include any spoilers. I will have to delete comments if there are spoilers in them. Let's try to keep the mystery for those who haven't experienced it yet. Okay, now let's tackle the one big question. Did I enjoy Tenet, or was it an overrated mess? The short answer is that I enjoyed it. The long answer is that we're way too spoiled. This film comes from a director whose filmography is usually extensively featured on most lists of best films of all time. He's done Inception, Interstellar. His last film, Dunkirk, was all over the Oscars. Heath Ledger's Joker and Christian Bale's Batman were the poster faces of one of the most loved comic book adaptations ever. He's done The Prestige, Insomnia, Memento. He's created a world of theories, ideas. He's had physics professors bending our minds. He's created huge realistic sets from scratch. So we've reached the point that we're always expecting more and more and more from him. If any other director had created this film, we would have considered it immense. But because it's Nolan, we're simply begging for more, and it's just not enough. So even when he comes out with a film which has a skillful cast, a great cinematography, a puzzling, intriguing storyline, an exceptional soundtrack, it appears like we have to make a choice between it being Nolan's masterpiece, his best film ever, or it being Nolan trying to outdo himself and he'll never top Inception and blah blah blah. It feels like we just can't say, you know what, it was a great film. Not one of my favourites of Nolan, but still an awesome story. So that's my answer. I liked it. I really liked it. It's not my favourite of Nolan's, probably not many's favourite, but I still pretty much enjoyed it. It has its flaws, as every film has. I can see why certain reviews put it down, but let's get to that step by step. The plot itself can't be extensively covered because of spoilers, but the main concept is pretty explanatory through all the trailers, all the promotional material, and that is reversion of time, meaning that the normal continuation of time has somehow been tampered with, and certain elements in our world flow in an opposite direction to us. For example, when the protagonist fires a gun, it doesn't discharge a bullet, but it rather recaptures it. A dropped object jumps back up, ships and cars move backwards, even the combat scenes are reversed. And the characters are warned that the situation has evolved into such a dangerous context that there is an imminent threat of something worse than a nuclear holocaust. Of course, for how ominous that may be, it looks fantastic on screen. You have some elements following their regular path, while others are flowing in the opposite sense. And apparently Chris Nolan, who swears by practical effects, has stated that to withstand the passing of time and to make the story the most believable to audiences, everything has to be carried out in a practical manner, avoiding as much as possible digital effects. So for example, John David Washington's character, who is involved in many fight scenes, actually had to prepare in order to carry out those combat sequences in reverse. And the concept of inversion isn't something that is perceived only in a physical sense, but it also entails a lot of challenging philosophic questions about our future, the space-time continuum, the chain reaction of events, the importance of time and the reality we perceive. So just as with other Nolan films, the plot offers both the straightforward action side of the story, but also all the ethical, philosophical doubts that come with it. In some points, I was wondering, are you doing okay, Chris? Do you need to talk? We're here for you. But one of the mammoth points of criticism that have been brought forward regarding Tenet is that it is just too complicated. Many people have said that it's just difficult for the sake of it having to be difficult, and that you can't really follow the story because you're trying to figure out what's going on. I agree that it is perplexing. It's not like other Nolan films in which you could theoretically just give up trying to figure out all the science part of it, and the plot will make sense anyway. Here in Tenet, if you lose track of what's going on, it becomes very hard to follow the general storyline. It really is a blink it and you miss it kind of film. The amount of information that is provided is staggering. It keeps on piling on, but also with a very, very little explanation regarding it. But then again, films like The Matrix require quite a few watches and a good in-depth knowledge of many philosophic points of view, mythical and spiritual references to actually understand what every detail is about, because you don't really receive a precise explanation, and yet it's considered one of the most popular films ever. Other reviews tied into this saying that Tenet has some huge plot holes. Now, I understand that the story is pretty complicated, but most, if not all, of the plot gaps that have been presented in reality have an explanation. Rather than the problem with the plot gaps, what I felt was that in many moments something had been cut out of the film. There were many moments in which one scene wouldn't tie smoothly into the next. The next step in the mission would suddenly begin without nothing building up to it. The characters decide to do something and then they're suddenly doing it. I don't know if this was due to time restrictions, due to having to produce the film pretty quickly during the current circumstances, but it definitely didn't help with already how complicated the story was. So I can see where the criticism is coming from. But at the same time, if Nolan hadn't made a complicated film, then we would have been complaining that he had stopped doing interesting films and he was just doing regular, boring films. The one thing I really agree on is that if you lose track of the events, you can't really emphasize with the ending, the epic apex of the story when everything comes together in the most dramatic way. If you're still trying to figure out what was going on previously, you will not be able to emphasize with that. Now instead, let's talk about the cast. So, John David Washington, he isn't a particularly well-known face to the general public, mostly because his title count isn't as extensive as others on set. The most notable film in which he is featured is BlacKkKlansman, with a character I really enjoyed. So although he is the son of award winner Denzel Washington, he never really had to go through the phase of, oh, he already had a foot in the door. He's been proving his worth on his own. Nobody really knows that he's his son. In Tenet, I felt he really acted the part of the hero. Most shots made him look like we really had a protector there, partially thanks to his physicality, partially for his calm demeanour. I just think he was well suited for this role. The other great protagonist was portrayed by Robert Pattinson, who was his sidekick. Now, I've spoken extensively about Robert Pattinson and about how I consider him a great actor who never deserved all the blind hatred he received for a film he starred in a decade ago when he was just at the beginning of his acting career. I really think he's a talented man who could have taken the easy path and made a bunch of money in the world of cheesy romance. Instead, look where he's now, with Oscar-nominated films, alongside the greatest actors and directors. People are finally starting to reconsider his talent. And here in Tenet, he had a really interesting role, which took me a while to get into. If you've seen Inception, his character kind of reminded me of Tom Hardy's one. Very skillful, very ingenious, but with a more amusing approach to the situation. Another great character I had completely overlooked while waiting for this film was the one portrayed by Elizabeth Debicki, but unfortunately I can't say anything about her character without entering in the spoiler world, so we'll have to wait for the end of this video, just as with Kenneth Branagh's character. Now, regarding the cast, many have pointed out how the emotions run quite flat throughout the film, how the characters' reactions lack of intensity in this worse than a nuclear holocaust situation. In my opinion, this is a feature which had actually already lowered a little the level of the trailers, which would include very bland sentences, statements, which were presented as incredible taglines, when in reality the film offers some much more memorable quotes. I admit I would have enjoyed a little more spice throughout the film. Again, I hate having to continuously quote other Nolan films, but for example, in Interstellar we had Matthew McConaughey bawling his eyes out, and it's a squeaky clean science fiction film. Leonardo DiCaprio's faces basically become a meme in Inception for how many emotions he was conveying, and it's a heist film. I just think a little more emphasis would have made it way more relatable. Because one of the great things about Nolan films is that they present some absolutely complicated, high-concept scenarios, but which are so grounded in reality that they become genuine. The whole concept is so detailed and so rational in its irrationality that it could legitimately happen in real life. The story is never an absurd fictional world from which you just snap out of at the end of the movie. Even his comic book adaptations, especially The Dark Knight, could potentially work without the viewer even knowing about the existence of Batman. It isn't about superheroes in the classic way. It's a post-9/11 dystopia about morality, society, sanity and insanity, and Tenet follows suit, but with just a little more emotion, it would have felt even more real. I really want to talk about Elizabeth Debicki's character at this point, but I will wait until the end for the spoilers. Now, one thing about this film which completely won me over, unexpectedly, was the soundtrack. If you've been following me for quite some time, you will know that I am a huge Hans Zimmer fan. And Hans Zimmer has been the main composer on many Christopher Nolan films, as well as being the name behind countless other popular soundtracks. From Pirates of the Caribbean to Gladiator, he's done it all. But this year, mostly due to scheduling conflicts, Hans Zimmer was not on set, and the composer for the film was Ludwig Göransson, who, although has worked on many famous projects, is definitely not as well known. But the music just sold it to me. It had us on edge throughout the whole film, just as the story meant to be. Thumping music in the background was one of the best feelings lately, especially combined with just the general emotion of being back in cinemas. And I later realised that that music you can hear throughout all the trailers actually kind of sounds like some reversed sound, some reverse music, although I don't know if this was intended or if I'm just getting carried away with things. Another huge collaborator of Nolan's is cinematographer Hoyte van Hoytema. Now, cinematography in itself is something which is often overlooked when taking in consideration a film. Often when you're looking at a mesmerizing, breathtaking shot, it's due to the excellent work of the cinematographer rather than just the director. And Chris Nolan's two longtime collaborators regarding cinematography have been Wally Pfister and Hoyte van Hoytema. The two have worked on very different looks. Wally Pfister created the urban looks of films like the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, the gritty look of Insomnia, whereas Hoyte van Hoytema made some of the epic wide shots seen in Interstellar and Dunkirk. So I was curious to see how this time round Hoyte van Hoytema would combine the two elements. And I must say I wasn't disappointed. Although they aren't any magnetizing shots, as in, I don't know, Interstellar, the beauty of objects moving in reverse seen on the widescreen, especially in the combat sequences, was fascinating. It really is a pity I couldn't see it in IMAX. IMAX cinemas in Italy in reality are very rare, and I'm not even sure if they're open at the moment. And up until now, to this date, I still haven't seen a film in an IMAX cinema. One thing which really dawned on me in these huge, overwhelming scenes with the dramatic music playing in the background is how this film and many other Nolan films are perfect if you want to be lost in the world of science, in the dilemma of paradoxes. You are fearful but also in awe at the human mind and what it's capable of conceiving. I must say I got a little emotional, but for the whole concept of film loving in general. So summing everything up, I really don't think Tenet is overrated. I think it depends a lot on your approach to the viewing experience. You have to try and enjoy it as just a good film, rather than as the best film of all time just because it says Nolan under the title. And I'm saying that from the perspective of somebody who's had for years this Interstellar poster in my bedroom. Nolan is my favourite director of all time. But that doesn't mean he'll just keep on making the best of the best of the best of the best of the best, and always topping what he's done previously. Are you familiar with the series Westworld? Well, it's created by Chris Nolan's brother, who's also written or co-written a bunch of films with him. Well, you enjoy the series Westworld because of how good it is, not because of the Nolan name tied to the project. I think that's the big issue I've always had with Tarantino. I don't have any particular issue with his films, but I just can't accept people coming up with a complete opinion about a Tarantino film, which isn't just, oh, it's a Tarantino film. Anyway, I don't think I can go any further with Tenet without entering the spoiler zone. So if you haven't seen Tenet yet and you don't want me to ruin it, you should click away as soon as possible. Are we all good now? Can I spoil everything? Right, so the first thing I would like to say is that usually many films which entail such secrecy upon their release and which feature such mammoth plots usually hide something bigger. Again, I hate quoting Inception and Interstellar over and over, but there was a reason why we always kept the secrecy about spoilers there. Instead, with Tenet, the main concept of complete annihilation of the human race was something we had already kind of predicted. We basically knew it involved a new technology and it was a threat to mankind, and somebody was communicating with the future. I think the most unexpected storyline was the one featuring Sator and Kat. I don't think anybody was expecting all that drama. The whole film was awesome, but not for the concept of reversion in itself. It had been quoted over and over in the trailers. It wasn't something as new as the concept of Inception. I think the reversion of time was incredible in the way it was implemented throughout the film, the way it spun in the events. The final battle with the red and blue team fighting together, but one in reverse in relation to the other, was fantastic. In addition to that, all the questioning about our future, the anger towards our generations and the effects on climate, that was the fantastic aspect about the film. It took a centuries-old dilemma about time travel and warped it into a blockbuster action movie. I loved how we realised at the end that Neil's character knew so much about the concept of reversion, but at the same time acknowledged that it is a lot to take in for others. And one of my favourite moments regarding that knowledge he has is the one in which him and the protagonist are bringing Kat back to the scene of the plane crash on the stretcher, running through the rubble of the explosion with everything going in the opposite sense and just defying everything we always accepted about time and space. Then earlier I was mentioning Elizabeth Debicki's character and her relationships with Kenneth Branagh's Russian Sator character. I don't think anybody was expecting all that drama, and I can't remember the last time I jumped in my seat due to a character's reaction lately. Meaning the moment in the Freeport when he turns around and he suddenly screams in insane anger at her. Her frustration built over the time was so well conveyed. At first with this just resigned despair, and then it becoming just a boiled up anger. I was definitely not expecting this storyline, although Nolan is known to often include troublesome female characters, so we should have seen this coming. As for the ending, I think the next time I watch this film I will be in tears. That final scene on the empty battleground with the protagonist crying, realising all of his relationship with Neil. I just think that upon the first viewing we're all still trying to patch together everything that happened previously, process all of that. So by the time we actually realise what's going on, the film has already moved on to the next scene. It definitely needs a rewatch. But for now, I think I have said everything I'd like to say about Tenet. I'm sure as soon as I switch off this camera, I'll remember a million other things I would have liked to talk about, but we'll always have time for that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to leave a comment down below with no spoilers, with all your thoughts about this film and about everything else I spoke about today. And if you liked it, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye.